Hello, Year Nines. Welcome back to week 4 of Lord of the Flies. You've been working really hard this past 3 weeks, so make sure you don't forget all of that hard work that you've done. It's all going to be really important when looking at this week's work, which is going to be on symbolism. To start off with, activity 1, we are going to be looking at a recap of those last 3 weeks because, like I said, they're going to be really important looking at today's work. This is going to be a recap of the plot, any context, and the importance of the island. Now, if you're finding that you're really struggling to answer these questions, then please don't hesitate to look back at the last few weeks' work. This is going to be really important when going through the next few activities. So, like I said, if you're struggling, it is not cheating to look back. This should take you roughly about 5 minutes to complete. Please complete it in full sentences. Once you have finished, look back over the questions and the answers and consider, how are they linked to symbolism? Now, looking at activity 2, we are going to be defining symbolism. Previously, you've probably defined symbolism in your classes, so we are not going to make you define it again. Instead, I'm going to give you the definition as said by the dictionary, which is as follows. Symbolism is the use of a symbol or an image to represent ideas or qualities. Now, that might sound a bit vague and abstract to you, but it is quite simple if you give an example, which we have done here with winter and spring. So, for example, most people usually symbolise winter as being quite negative, quite cold. It's a symbol of death and endings. In contrast, spring is usually symbolic of rebirth, of new beginnings, of fresh, colourful, new starts. Those symbols are quite simple and straightforward to understand. So below, we've provided some more quite simple symbols that all we would like you to do is define and explain. The first one has been done for you as an example, showing a group of religious symbols which obviously symbolise religion, but therefore also symbolise equality, peace, freedom and togetherness. Like I've said, your task is just to go through the 3 below, define what the symbol might be, and then explain what it is symbolic of. This should take you about 10 minutes. For activity 3, we would like you to create a symbol. Now again, this might sound quite vague and quite abstract, but really it is quite simple once it is explained. So for example, a symbol to you might be a possession, a person, a memory, or a hobby that holds a specific meaning to you. This could be a teddy bear that has been given to you by a parent, a guardian, a grandparent, an auntie, an uncle, a friend, and it represents something quite hopeful, something quite nice, kind. It might represent a happy memory, and that is what that is symbolic of. It can be, again, more abstract. So the example in the booklet is about football. For some people, that might be symbolic of passion, pride, teamwork, hard work, determination, entertainment. It's up to you to decide what you want your symbol to be and think, how is that symbolic to me? Now, this should take roughly around about 10 minutes once you've picked your symbol. However, if you're struggling to think of what is symbolic to you, take that little bit of extra time and you can even move on to the next few activities and perhaps come back when we've delved into symbolism in Lord of the Flies in more detail. If you've got any further questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact with one of your teachers on Show My Homework or via email, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you out with some examples or some things that might be symbolic to you. For activity 4, we are now going much more specifically in detail of symbolism in Lord of the Flies. In your booklet, there is an article with 4 or 5 key symbolic characters or things in the novel that are very symbolic. What we would like you to do is read through this article and highlight 10 key facts that show why these characters, all these things, are symbolic. However, we do not want you to highlight the first 10 sentences that you see. This will be a waste of time and will mean that actually there will be stuff underneath that you will miss because you've not read it in detail. Instead, what we would like you to do is read through the whole article once without underlining anything. As you're reading, just pick up on what those key things may be. Then scan back through it a second time and highlight, underline those 10 key facts. Try to make sure there is an equal spread of highlighting or underlining across the whole article. Like I said, if you've got 10 in the first and second paragraph and then none anywhere underneath, you need to go back and do it again because you've not got a wide enough spread. Once you've done that, underneath there is a true false challenge. What I would like you to do is just go through each of the true and falses and say whether the statement is true or false. Very simple. However, an extra challenge on top of that is to go back into the ones that are false and correct them. So for example, if one of the statements you deem to be false, all you need to do is write out a sentence next to it with the correct answer. This should take you roughly 15 minutes. Now, looking at activity 5, we're again going back to the contextual side of things and looking at why do people wear masks. For this activity, to start off with, you don't have to consider Lord of the Flies at all, though thinking about it in the back of your mind might help. Because what we want you to do is think about, in the real world, on a day-to-day basis, why might people wear masks? An example given for you is because people might not feel comfortable in their own skin and they're using that mask to hide their identity, because if they wear that mask, they actually feel more comfortable, more confident and more positive about themselves. As it says in the booklet, you can add to this idea, but you will also need at least 4 ideas. So if you're adding to this idea, that means 3 brand new ideas all on your own. Or if you're not adding to this original idea, you need 4 brand new ideas. We also want you to make sure that you don't just give an idea, but you explain why that person might want to wear the mask. There are a few examples for you on the slide. So we've seen a lot of people starting to wear masks currently in the coronavirus pandemic. Why? Superheroes wearing masks. Why might they do it? These are all very important things to consider when looking into why people wear a mask. This should take you roughly 10 minutes. However, again, there's always a challenge. So what I'd like you to do is, having looked at these, then consider plot points from the novel and see if you can attach them to each idea. For activity 6, we're going even deeper into Lord of the Flies and looking at a very important extract in the novel, which is looking at Jack and the first time he puts on his mask. This is crucial to the novel because it shows Jack's descent into savagery, and as he starts to lose his mind, he loses that civilized part of himself and begins to become more and more tribal, more violent and more like a dictator. There's a quote within the extract, it's showing that this is even more important because he starts to compel the other boys, and because he's wearing the mask, they become tricked into the kind of things that he is doing. What we'd like you to do, with all of this taken into consideration, is to read the extract through once, then read it through again a second time, and identify 4 or 5 key quotes. These could be words or entire phrases, and talk about the connotations of this and the specific symbolic meaning this might have for the rest of the novel. However, we don't just want you making random annotations that might say under compelled that it is negative. That's not detailed enough. Instead, you'll see there are 4 different specific ways of annotating that would be extremely useful. Number 1, when looking at a word or phrase, can you look at the specific meaning? Once again, going back to compelled, you might annotate off there that the specific meaning is that it's almost forcing people to do something. By doing that and looking at that specific meaning, you've already made it make much more sense and started to bring out more understanding. For number 2, then you'd look at the connotations of this. So what different inferences can you get out of that word? Again, looking at compelled. What are the connotations of someone being forced, of someone being compelled to do something? What might you infer from that about Jack's character and how the rest of the novel might go? For number 3, you need to explain why the author chose that specific word or that specific phrase. Once again, coming back to compelled. Why did he choose to say compel rather than to trick? Why did he use compel rather than manipulate? What is the purpose of that specific word being used? What kind of effect was he having on you as a reader? And then finally, are there any further language features other than the symbolism that might further affect your understanding? This should take you roughly 20 minutes to have a look at. So make sure you're going into a lot of key depth and you're keeping those 4 ideas in mind when annotating. For activity 7, we're going to be looking now in more detail at 2 quotes. Because you're only looking at 2 quotes, not a whole extract, this time you've got to go into even more detail. And I'd like you to pick out 3 or 4 different things from that one sentence. Once again, look at those 4 things we've just talked about. So start with the specific meaning, then look at the connotations, then explain why the author chose to use that specific word, and then any further language features you might see in there. You need to do that 3 to 4 times for each quote. Once you've done this, be trying to add any contextual information that might be in there, and then also be having a look at how it might link to that idea of the masks that we just looked at with Jack. For a bit of extra idea of what these quotes mean, the first one is looking at the idea of Simon realising that the beast might not be real for the first time, and actually it's a creation of the boy's mind. Be considering, what does that suggest about savagery and how the boys have become more and more insane the longer they've been on the island. The second quote is about the conch. The conch, remember, is a symbol of civilization and democracy, so it's their last way of looking at the civilized world. If the conch is destroyed, what does that suggest about their civilization? Again, this should take you roughly 15 to 20 minutes, so make sure you're doing it in detail, looking at those 4 specific ways of annotating a quote. Finally, we're going to be looking at doing a write-up. Specifically, how does Golding use symbolism to display a descent from civilization into savagery throughout the novel? Don't now randomly pluck something out of thin air. This is meant to be linked to the quotes that you've already looked at. So either the bit about Jack with his mask, the bit about the beast not being real, or about the conch exploding. What I'd like you to do is not focus on all 3 in one paragraph. Pick out one specific quote and explain it in as much detail as possible. This should take 1 paragraph. You'll see that there's a text box in the workbook with some ideas of what you should focus on. So specific connotations of language, specific language features, context, 2+ comments per quote, and the effect it has on the reader. There are also some sentence starters there to help you out. If you would like to look at all 3 of the quotes, make sure you're writing 3 separate paragraphs. That would be excellent if you can do more than one paragraph, but it is only compulsory to do the single paragraph as long as you make sure it is in detail. This should take you about half an hour to do. So given that it should take that long, make sure you're cramming in as much detail as possible. And it's also advisable that you should do some planning beforehand to make sure it's concise yet detailed. Good luck, Year 9s. Keep up the good work you've been doing over the last 3 weeks, and I look forward to seeing the responses that you give to this workbook.